Which brings us to episode 6, our final excursion into the archives, and we're back really to Alf Burroughs' story, but also really a slight theme of remembrance tinged with sadness, if you like. These two ladies are Mrs. Elizabeth Ann Butler. She's the lady on the right, and with her is Annie Elizabeth Glover. And their significance is that they've just pulled the string to unveil the big memorial arch in Victoria Park, the big Lutyens War Memorial. And they were chosen, Mrs. Butler was chosen because she had 8 sons in the army. 3 of them were killed, 1 died of consumption, 1 was wounded twice, and another was wounded once. So that's 6 of her sons were killed or wounded in the First World War, and that's why they chose her. And Mrs. Glover, she had 3 sons killed. So it's quite interesting. These, again, are very ordinary people, and we know them. We have photographs of them simply and purely because fate took a hand in their lives, robbed them of their children, but we remember them. Anyway, we left Alf Burroughs. Here he is, Corporal Burroughs. He's actually sergeant by 1916. We left him advancing across no man's land in artillery formation. And here's a photograph of soldiers in artillery formation. They're all spread out, so that if an artillery shell explodes above them, it won't kill all of them if they clustered together. And we left him in no man's land. And in fact, at home in Leicester, Annie was also thinking about him, where he was, what he was doing. And she wrote to him this letter, very interesting letter. This is actually 3rd of October 1916, so this is a week later. And she wrote a very interesting letter. She talks about, she says something like, "They came again on Sunday night, but I don't think done much damage. They fetched another one down." That's something. And she's talking about Zeppelins, German Zeppelins over the East Midlands. And there's family chit chat. Someone's had a gold bracelet, and so-and-so's been wounded. I think you knew him at Cannock Chase. Frank's okay. It's rather nice. Willie, their son Willie, has got a bit of a cough, but nothing to worry about. Frank's all right, and sends his best love to his dad. And she says, "I'm in the pink, thank you."
Yeah.
So lots of nice kisses. Heaps of love and kisses from Mam and the children and so on. But she also says in the letter, "I hear the Leicesters are in it again." And that, of course, is the news of the attack on Guerdicourt. And in fact, the letter came back to her in the most terrible way possible, actually returned to sender, if you like, and it was noted on it, "Killed in action, J.W. Sheldon, 2nd Lieutenant." And also there's a big oily stamp from the Army Record Office in Lichfield, "Killed in action." So she must have received this mid-October 1916. It may have been the first intimation she had that her husband had not survived the attack on Guerdicourt. So a real bitter blow. And her reaction, or someone in the family's reaction, was to take that photograph we see down to the newspaper, and the Leicester Daily Post published his photograph, Sergeant Alfred Burroughs killed. And interestingly, they thought the most significant thing about him was that he went through the siege of Ladysmith, which is rather nice. And also at the end of the war, his old employer, the Leicester City Mental Hospital up at the Towers, they produced a huge bronze war memorial plaque, and his name is on there, Male Nurse A. Burroughs at Guerdicourt, spelt wrong, 25th of September 1916. And you think about it, you think, well, this is quite amazing. This is a war that killed 3 members of staff at one Leicester institution. And it took away, about 3 dozen others made them serve during the war, but it killed 3 of them. You know, what sort of war kills 3 people from one organisation in Leicester? And you think, this is bad. But then you go to Thiepval on the Somme, and you go to the great memorial arch there, and Alfred Burroughs' name is carved into it, and he is one of 72,000 names of soldiers killed on the Somme, and that's just the 72,000 with no known grave. That really does bring it home, doesn't it? That really is quite something terrible to contemplate. 72,000.
Yeah, that's incredible, isn't it?
Yes. You've got members of your family, I think, Jenny, haven't you, on there?
Yes, my great uncle Georgie, who was killed on the Somme, aged 21 in October 1916 as well.
Yeah, so he was a week after Alf Burroughs.
Yeah,
it really is a conflict that touched the entire country. You know, there can't have been many families that weren't unaffected in some way by that war.
Yeah.
So, it's one of the ironies, really, is that if you want to research people in the First World War, it's far easier to find them if they were killed than if they weren't. And if you're researching someone like Alfred Burroughs, he was killed in the First World War, you can go online, just type in CWGC for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Just put in any search engine, CWGC, and you'll get this. And you can search for him. Or search for whoever you're looking for. They're all there, and some of them have a vast amount of information, some it's a fairly small amount of information, and you can print out a memorial certificate sort of thing like that that I've put up on the screen there about Alfred Burroughs. Sometimes there's a lot more detail about moving the body from one cemetery to another and this sort of thing. Sometimes there's the circumstances of the death, an account of why they're buried there, particularly because the such and such a casualty clearing station was based in that village, this sort of thing. So it's well worth having a look there, and it is utterly free, so it's really rather good. Or you can go to a library or the record office, and you can look at a Roll of Honour. There's a Roll of Honour that was produced in 1919, and there's a much more up-to-date one done by the Doyles, which there's the Somme Memorial on the cover.
Yeah.
And that is a really wonderful piece of work, 5 volumes, I think, with great detail. And it will tell you about the people and their career. And sometimes it will give you a snippet, a quotation from the war diary about the day they were killed. It can sometimes be misleading, because if someone died of wounds, they didn't die on, they weren't wounded on the 1st of October, but you'll get the war diary from the 1st of October, and it's not the relevant day. So, just watch that. Bear in mind that some people lingered with a wound for weeks or months even. And you can also look, again, freely, if it's a regimental thing, you can pursue the man through his regiment. So Alfred Burroughs was in the Leicestershire Regiment, later Royal Leicestershire Regiment. So you can go online and you can search, have you a tiger in your family? And find out details about him there. And there's a nice, there's that photograph of him again, which appears in many places, and people will add further information. I think it might even be me that added that further information, but I don't remember if I did.
It's bound to be good.
Yes.
Very high quality.
I'm sure it's accurate anyway. But we do have his papers, so I have a slight head start, and I'm able to correct 1 or 2 things if it was me. I wouldn't also have called him a signalman. I think that's a railway thing, isn't it? In the army, he'd be a signaller. However, that's a nitpicky point, and we don't wish to be nitpicky, do we, Jenny? We're not.
No, we don't do that.
No, we're precise and accurate, not nitpicky. So anyway, back to Alfred. What happened to him? Well, very soon after the letter that came back, Mrs. Burroughs received another letter from a chap called Linthwaite. Jacklinthwaite, who'd been in the army with Alf in South Africa and in the First World War, and he wrote a very nice letter to her, very comforting letter, saying, you know, I'm ever so sorry, I deeply sympathise with your sad bereavement and so on, and telling her a little bit about, you know, he died a glorious death with his face to the enemy, leading his platoon and cheering them on to victory. He didn't suffer, of course. He was killed instantly, and all this sort of thing. And I hope it was a comfort to Mrs. Burroughs. It was very good of him to write such a detailed letter to make sure that she knew. It was also very good that he promised Alf that he would look after Mrs. Burroughs and so on, and he was doing his duty as a chum, as a mate of Alf's. And shortly after that, another letter came from a brother sergeant, Sgt Morale of the Leicestershire Regiment. And Jenny, could you bear to read this one? It's worth reading this one as well.
To Mrs. Gamble and family. I'm writing these few lines, hoping they will comfort you all a little and let you know how your husband died for his country. It was on the 25th of September that we had to go and take a strong German position, and just after starting he had a bullet pass through his leg. He got into a deep shell hole and dressed his wound. After having a little rest, he attempted to get back from where we started from, but just as he got up, a German sniper shot him. I can assure you he suffered no pain from the second bullet. It was about 2 p.m, September 25th, that he died, and was buried by some of his own men the following day. From a brother sergeant, Sgt Morale. Thank
you. So you can see the eagerness of comrades to reassure the widow, to give the widow the facts of what had happened, the time even, the time of day, and so on. So Mrs. Burroughs would have felt, you know, that Alf had friends and that he was looked after, that his comrades buried him carefully and so on. The sad thing is that the Somme battlefield was fought over several times, and a lot of those burials, even though they were known in 1916, had been lost by 1918. And so, you know, his was one of those unknown burials. This is the militia attestation of John Alfred Linthwaite, who's Jack Linthwaite, the mate of Alf's. And there's an interesting sort of codicil, if you like, to the story, because William Burroughs, this is Bill Burroughs, who I met. He must have been in his 90s when I met him. A charming, absolutely charming, you know, very gentlemanly man. And I imagine, you know, that his dad was like that, a very thoughtful, pleasant man. But he sought out Jack Linthwaite after his mother had died and contacted him and said, "Are you the Jack Linthwaite who was with my dad, Alf Burroughs?" And Jack Linthwaite wrote back sometime at the end of the Second World War and said, yes, I am. And he said, your dad had been wounded, but all had got into the shell hole as a little cover from shell fire. And as it was getting dark, they made an attempt to get back to their own lines, but were under shell fire. And the Jerrys had all the no man's land ranged to a few yards. Had your dad waited until darkness had set in properly, then they might have had a chance. But the day had been awful. The heat was overpowering, and without water, it's a terrible ordeal. That is why they made a break for it. Also, there were some badly wounded men in the shell hole, and their cries and groans for water was terrible. So you can imagine a group of wounded soldiers, some with blighty wounds, you know, that they thought that was going to get them home and so on. They're sitting in a shell hole under fire still, and they had men to look after who were suffering terribly because it was so hot and there was no water. So it may well have been that Alf Burroughs, as the sergeant, thought, well, it's up to me to look after these chaps. I will try and get back and get some help. And in doing so, he was killed. So it's very sad, but it just shows you the amount of depth you can go into with a bit of luck in researching individual details, occurrences on the battlefield and elsewhere. And we shall finish really. Here we are, back to the Burroughs family again. by quoting Alfred, because he's always very readable, his letters home. And this one, I think, Jenny, could you bear to read this one again? Because I think this sums it up for us. It's a last valuable lesson, I always think, that no one, no matter how minor a character in great events, should ever be forgotten. And that it tells us that everybody has a story to tell, and that it's a story that's worth sort of seeking out and exploring. So, if we can conclude in a way our story of the Burroughs family with the words of Alfred, you'll see what I mean if Jenny will read it in her splendid way.
Unfortunately, the men who make history can rarely write it, for fighting and literary ambition seldom go hand in hand. Still, what poor efforts I make, I know you will appreciate. A view as seen through the eyes of one of the human atoms who formed part of that rather unfortunate army.